I'm Stephanie Simpson. I teach at Riverdale Country School. I am their director of coaching, which is a new position that we started about 2 years ago. And I am creating a culture of coaching by facilitating workshops for both students and faculty, training different faculty and administrators on how to be more coach-like in any role that they have at the school, and then offering coaching to anybody at the school, both students and faculty. I'm also the dance program director at the school from 6th grade to 12th grade, and a little that brought me to this work. So back in 2012, I did my first master's program and really got into performance anxiety. So I was working with a lot of theater and dance professionals on how to overcome performance anxiety and their fears and everything like that. And then last year, I finished a program at Columbia Teachers College in their clinical psych program with an emphasis in spirituality, mind, body, and really focused on stress and our relationship with stress. So today, we are going to learn a little bit about stress, and some of it might be a review to some of you, some might not. And then we're going to talk about different tools that you can use, and we're going to practice some of them on this call. If you do have questions, and Marcy probably went over this, you can put them in the chat and we'll definitely get to them by the end, though if some of them pop up and I'm able to see them in relation to what we're talking about right away, then I'll answer them at that moment. So I am going to share my screen now, and we'll get started. All right, thumbs up that we can see that. Great. Okay, so finding your balance, how to build a stress management practice that works for you. So something that I think is incredibly important is that what works for me might not work for you, and what works for me on one day may not work for me on another day, and so forth, right? So it's really about understanding yourself and understanding that you have so many different tools that you can use so that you create something that really works for you. So let's start with a definition of stress, since we might all have very different ones, right? So stress, it's a physical, mental, or emotional factor that causes some sort of bodily change, right? So if you look down at the end of that slide, we have a stressor, we have a can you still hear me? Because it's telling me. Okay, great. And so a stressor, what might be a stressor to me might not be a stressor to you, right? So something like a stressor could be losing the internet right before you're supposed to be giving a webinar, right? And that happens, right? Now, we all may react to it in different ways. If I choose to react to it, keyword choose to react to it in a way that's like, this is the worst thing in the world, blah, 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 you're going to have some sort of physical reaction, right? And the actual stress reactivity, that is your physiological reaction to stress, which we'll talk about. And then there ends up being a strain, right? So say like I couldn't get myself together, the strain might be that I like have like a panic attack and then I'm like, I can't do this anymore, right? So that might be the actual strain or the effect of it. So for many people, a strain is like getting a headache or muscle tension, back aches, right? Shoulder aches, things like that, that also then could lead to headaches. And then there are some that are a lot worse down the line if you don't manage them, right? So they can be external, so they can be in our environment, they can be having to do with social relationships, jobs, things like that, or it could be internal, right? So illness or some sort of disease can be an internal thing that causes stress. And there's a lot of research on how stress causes certain types of illnesses as well. So it goes back and forth. So when we have our stress reactivity, we go into the fight, flight, or freeze. So there's this threat that comes, right? This stressor comes. The amygdala basically goes like this and it like flies off like, you know, your lid flying off type thing. And then we either fight back, we run away, or we also could freeze. And physiologically what's happening is we're releasing a lot of cortisol in order for us to be able to do those kind of like superhuman adrenaline like things. And then we have an increased heart rate and blood pressure. Now, where this can become problematic if we're not managing our stress is that weakens our immune system, right? So in our day and age right now, we really want to keep our immune system up. So being able to like shift our relationship with stress and manage it more effectively will actually help us to be more healthy. Great. So before we get into a little more about stress, I want us to recognize the differences between these four things. So a lot of times we start out by saying, oh my God, I'm so stressed, I'm so stressed, I'm so stressed. And yet we're actually not stressed. We are fearful, or we have some sort of anxiety going on. All right. So fear is an untaught instinctive reaction. So that fight, flight, or freeze thing, right? So we don't even have to be taught about it. It's like that. Don't put your hand. I mean, maybe you have put your hand on the stove when you were younger and then you'll never do it again because you're afraid of getting hurt, right? So there are certain ways where fear is actually important because it protects us. However, there's also like the fears of like, oh, I'm not going to do well on this test. And now I'm fearful that I'm not going to go to college, right? Which I feel like comes up all the time with students where they're like, I'm going to fail this test. And it's like, okay, well, and then I'll never go to school. And you're like, oh, okay. Like that's probably like some sort of, that's a lot of anxiety comes from that, right? So fear can lead into worry, which is then repeating that thought over and over and over and over again. Kind of like you're on a rocking chair. The thought just keeps going back and forth. Anxiety is an unwarranted or excessive fear. So the idea of like, if I fail this test, I'm never going to go to college. For most students, that's probably like an excessive fear to have. And so it's making them anxious. And then the more they become anxious, they begin to worry even more. And then that becomes stress, because stress then becomes this perceived like inability to be able to handle what's going on. They're too overwhelmed, right? Or they see what the project is, the outcome of the project, and that becomes too overwhelming. And so then they start worrying about things and there's really a fear under it and it can go backwards that way. So the first thing I always say to people is when you find yourself saying, oh my God, I'm so stressed out, or this is stressing me out, take a moment and actually categorize. Am I actually afraid of something? Am I just worried about something? Is this anxiety? Because you'll get to, the more you stop and like reflect internally on where this is coming from, the better you have to choose a different choice, a different pathway, right? So, and we're going to talk about that, like neuroplasticity and creating new pathways. So comprehensive stress management. If you really look, so I also teach stress management at John Jay College in the city, and you'll realize that the purpose of stress management is not to eliminate all stress. It is to redefine our relationship with stress. It is impossible to get rid of everything stressful in our lives, nor is that what we want. And we'll talk about why we don't want to do that. It's important for us to manage the stressors in our life. And so a comprehensive stress management means that we're creating interventions or roadblocks at all these different points through our stressful like trip, we'll call it. Like if we think of ourselves riding in a car and the stressor happens and all of a sudden the car takes off and we're on this road and it's kind of spiraling out of control, we want to make sure we have roadblocks in all these different places. So the four major categories: source management, so actually reducing or eliminating the source of the stress; relaxation, which is using breath and meditation techniques. Some of those we'll learn today; thought management, a reframing or a relabeling of thoughts to make them less stressful; and then prevention, so planning to avoid stressors. So source management and prevention obviously are kind of the more important in some ways, but we can't always eliminate some of the stress that's going on, right? So like as educators, I don't know about your schools, but like my school just did their comments. Like we had to write comments. And so you do them for every single student, right? That can be a major source of stress. I cannot eliminate that because it's part of my job as much as I would like. What I can do is try to figure out how to go about it where it reduces the stress that it brings up in my life, right? I can also prevent it from being super stressful by planning to do them earlier, or really creating times in my schedule to stop and write them all out rather than just leave them all to the night before and it become like an overwhelming task, right? So that's where source management and prevention are really like keys. However, that's not always necessary or not always capable of just using those two. We need some sort of other management. So relaxation, being able to physically get the body to a different state. So like maybe we can't think clearly because our physiological aspect of our body is just going crazy, right? Using a relaxation or meditation or breath or something can help bring us back to a baseline so that we can choose the appropriate reaction. Same with thought management. Thought management is really shifting the way you're seeing stuff, the perspective of it. And really when it comes down to stress management, everything comes down to what lens are you looking at when you're looking at this stressor and how different way, right? So though for some of us, it's really hard to do that if we're in like an anxious state. And then with comprehensive stress management, it's a practice. It's a daily sort of practice, and more so it's a daily practice when we don't feel like we need to do it, are the days that we have to do it so that our body knows what to switch into when. Okay. So here we are with like a new perspective, new pathway. So we talked a little bit about how when we get a stressor, whatever that may be, we automatically kind of go into that fight, flight, or freeze, right? So like the amygdala flies off. We like send out warning signals. Your nervous system gets triggered and everything like that gets triggered. Hormones are being released, cortisol is being released, all of that. It is possible though, through neuroplasticity that we are learning in research, to create a new pathway. So if we can take a moment before we actually react in some way, we then allow the hippocampus to remind us of other experiences, and that may reduce our fear, right? And then it allows our cerebral cortex to understand the situation more, not maybe blow it up in proportion so that it becomes so overwhelming that we can create a new plan as our response, which then creates a new pathway and builds a new resilience for us. So resilience is really about how fast can I get from where my balance is? How quickly can I get back to my balance when I get knocked off? That's resilience, right? I work with a program outside of Riverdale that is an Arts for Social Change program, and I specifically work with their foster care kids, and I am always amazed with how resilient that group of students are, so much so that like it makes me stop and go, wow, the things that like freak me out like fail in comparison to the stuff that they're going through. And the fact that like they can show up to rehearsal every day and I find out like such and such just happened the night before, or they like moved houses again and stuff, and yet they're still there and they're still doing the work and they're smiling. I'm like, wow, that is like resilience like I've not seen, right? So it's about how can the quote here I love is, resiliency is not in invulnerability to stress, but rather the ability to recover from the negative events. And how quickly we can do that shows how resilient we are as a person. And, there's a lot of talk about like, do we have coping skills? Are we teaching those and stuff? And I job with more social emotional learning curriculum and introspection work and reflection, helping the students to do that. One of the things that I find is maybe still missing, which is why I love doing workshops like this, is how can we support the administrators and the teachers to manage their stress so that when they go into the classroom, if something happened to them personally or professionally, they know how to manage that before they get into a room of people that they're now in charge of, right? Because if we're going into a room already kind of like frazzled and our amygdala is out, what's going to happen when all of a sudden the kid does something that really irks us, like our patience are a lot less, right? And even specifically now with learning different modalities, having different things way out of our control, it's important for us to be able to have our own practice and manage our own selves so that we can show up for the people, the students and people in our lives. And I firmly believe that we have the power of teaching them even more if we're modeling some of these behaviors and doing it with them, right? So the breath exercise that I'll teach you, I do that with my students, or, if they ask me, how do you handle this? I'll be like, well, here's like a way to think about that. And I don't know what subjects you all teach, but definitely if you're in an academic subject, test anxiety is very high, right? And so teaching them a couple of these things that they can even do before they take a test, you'll notice a difference in it, and kind of and saying that this is something you're working on as well. I find that helps them be a little more open and vulnerable with coming out, wanting help and reaching out for help. So we talked a little bit how we don't want to erase stress completely. And that's because we actually need a certain amount of stress in order for us to perform at our highest potential, to have peak performance. So you can think about this a lot of times when I think about teaching stress management or giving examples, I talk about when I ran the New York City Marathon for the first time 2.5 years ago, back in 2017. And I was not really a runner, but I wanted to run the New York City Marathon. I was like, we're just going to try and do this. And it seemed super overwhelming to me. And times it really stressed me out, right? However, I then stepped back and was like, okay, how can I create different markers so that I could do smaller races and build my way up so that I could build my confidence to then be able to be like, okay, I don't know how this is going to happen, but I think I can actually do the marathon. In addition to that, if you've ever done any sort of training for something long like that, doesn't have to be running, you cannot push yourself too much, too fast, or you get injured, right? So if I don't keep pushing myself enough, to the point, to that brink, I call it the sweet spot of stress, physically, mentally, emotionally, then you're never going to grow, right? So if I just stayed at 5 miles every week, there was no way I was going to be able to do 26.2, right? So every week I had to up my mileage in order to build the muscles, the breath capacity, and really most of it was mental, right? So if we don't have enough stress, we get bored, we get unengaged. What's happening right now, in the world now, is that the stress is becoming more anxiety because of this fear of the unknown, but yet we don't have any actual stressors in the sense of time is kind of this weird thing, right? And so people are I even find myself being I have so many hours in the day, and then I'm like, why did I not get anything done? And it's because in my head I'm like, oh, well, I have so much time, and then but there's no sort of pressure to it, right? So then the more that you get a little more stress, you become excited by something, right? So we talk about it as distress and eustress, which will be the next slide actually. And then as that rises up, we get to that sweet spot where there's this balance. If you're familiar with Csikszentmihalyi's flow theory, he talks about this in the sense of having the 8 different categories, this loss of control, but the sense of control, the loss of time, not being, the loss of consciousness, having the right level of expertise and challenge, right? If you are in a class that is way too challenging for you, you're not going to perform optimally because you're going to be on the other end of this bell curve. You're going to be overwhelmed and anxious. And so you're not going to be able to perform well because of all the things, you're going to have the stress reactivity all the time, right? And it's probably going to get into a lot of negative self-talk. Whereas if you're in a class that's not challenging enough for you, you're going to be bored. And so you're also not going to do well, right? So finding that little place. So we talked about now how if you go too far over, you become anxious and overwhelmed, and that's not helpful either. So we want to find that sweet spot for us. And that sweet spot is called eustress. So we have eustress and distress. Eustress is known as the good stress, and that stress is like, and again, I'm going to give out examples, and for totally eustress, and for others be like, absolutely, that's giving me a lot of distress, right? So some of the examples are like getting married, right? So getting married and planning a wedding can be very stressful, yet it can be a eustress event because it's fun, it's exciting, you're starting a new journey, you get to like celebrate with people. That doesn't mean that there's certain things around the down the line that aren't overwhelming, but it's bringing something good to your life, right? Or going back to school, going to get another degree, that can have a lot of stressful components to it, yet it's furthering you in your development personally, maybe in your career. It's allowing you to meet other people. So it's a good thing. It's personal growth. And in order to grow, we know that we have to go through some sort of discomfort to be able to expand. Distress would be things that are bad, right? So like losing your home, right? Or like losing power, like some of our students are probably losing power right now, and like I thought I was. That could cause a lot of distress, which is like I can't really fix anything. I could try to switch my mindset about it, like, and obviously it's not life-threatening, but there are other things like that that could be, right? And what we want to try to do is look at situations and maybe at the beginning be like, would this be good stress or bad stress? Or even if it's bad stress, how can I look at this in a different way that could maybe lend itself to a more eustress sort of way? Some people also say like there's a level of looking at things like, oh, you're just always seeing the problems of everything. Like stress is just like, oh, it's just a problem. It's just a problem. And then being able to bring yourself to the place of like, how is this not a problem? How can I look at this as a challenge? Right? How can I get challenged by this and get excited by it? And then some coaching methodologies would even say, go a step further. How do you not even see it a problem or a challenge? Where do you see the opportunity? Right? So a situation happens and you're like, where's the opportunity in this? Which can help frame your mind in a different way. So I created, from my work at Teachers College, a 21-day stress management workbook. And it's a holistic, interactive guide to redefining your relationship with stress. So going on this idea that you can't get rid of stress, but if we are able to actually stop and have a conversation with it. So sometimes I do talks and I call it stress, my new best friend, right? So like, how can I have a conversation with and learn about the stress, which is also going to allow me to learn about myself more deeply? And then how can I redefine that relationship so that the stress is working with me in a facilitative way instead of working against me in a debilitating way? And my practice and my philosophies all come from holistic work. So you're going to get, I'll show you here. So it's a calendar, 21 days. Each day has a different tool to it, and they're separated into 7 categories. So there's the breath, there's the mind, there's the body, there's the perspective, which is a little more about the thought stuff. There's visualization, some sort of creativity aspect of it, and then values. You'll notice that I don't say spirit in this sort of way. A lot of these come from spiritual practices. I just know that sometimes can trigger people in different ways. And so for me, I firmly believe that we all have a core sense, and that's usually our values. And so if we can get clear on what our core values are, or like our compass, then we can align things. So we're going to go through a few of these right now, hopefully 7 of them if we have time as a group. I do want to let you know that at the end of this, in like a couple of days or so, Marcy will send out the recorded link, and she will also send you the PDF of the whole 21-day stress management book. So you'll have that as a resource. And the idea behind it, I'm sure you've all heard 21 days to get rid of a habit, 21 days to build a habit. So that is slightly true. It's a little misleading in the sense that when you really research where that came from, it came from a man who was a plastic surgeon, and he found that after he did procedures, 21 days was like the minimum number of days any of his patients had before their body started to start to heal and accept whatever it was procedure they had. But that didn't mean that things were completely ready to go in 21 days. It actually, when you read about it, it could be up until 200 days. So it's different for all of us, but 21 days tends to be a good basis to try to start a new habit. And so for me, in making this, I wanted the people I was working with and the people who got this book to have 21 different skills and tools to use. And when you get it, you'll see the way to use it. You rate your stress beforehand, then it has directions and a little bit of a place to write down your place to rate your stress afterwards. And then down at the bottom, there's a little box that you can put in 1 through 5, how much you liked the tool. So that at the end of the 21 days, you can look back and be like, wow, I really loved day 2, 10, 12, 16, 18, and 19. Well, great. Start with those then as things that you try to implement and integrate into your daily practices. Yet you have 21 to use as just like a starting off point. There's so many more, obviously, than the 21 at your disposal. Because again, one might work one day and not the other day. So let's start in on the first one. So we're going to do a tool called square breathing. And what I love about this tool is that it can combine 2 different ones. So it's going to combine breath work, and it can also combine visualization. So the way that it's going to go is we're going to inhale for a count of 4. And if you do want to do the visualization aspect of it, then you can close your eyes. And I would like you to visualize your inhale creating a line that goes vertical. And then we're going to pause at the top of our inhale for 4 and then visualize that pause going across horizontal. Then we're going to exhale out the nose for 4, and that comes down as the other vertical, and then pause at the bottom for 4, and that finishes the square. So we'll do 2 rounds of this together. Try to inhale and exhale through your nose, but if that's uncomfortable, just do it however works for you. And I like closing my eyes during it. So just exhale everything out right now. And then we'll inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, and pause. 2, 3, 4, and exhale. 2, 3, 4, and pause. 2, 3, 4. Again, inhale. 2, 3, 4, and pause. 2, 3, 4, and exhale. 2, 3, 4, and pause. 2, 3, 4. And then you can slowly open your eyes. And maybe you've noticed a little shift in just doing that, a little more of a groundedness, a centeredness. This is one I love doing before going into speaking to a group, or if I'm noticing that a lot of my students are feeling really, we'll stop and do this together. And then that usually shifts our mentality to be like, okay, now where do we need to go from here? So that's square breathing. All right, number 2. So this is one of the mind ones. So when we talk about thought replacement or thought mindset work, we're really thinking about our self-talk, right? So our self-talk is anything we say internally or out loud about ourselves. And typically it goes into 3 different categories. We have our negative self-talk, we have our instructional self-talk, and our positive self-talk. I like to, when I'm talking to people about it, say like our negative self-talk is like our gremlin, right? And so the person or thing that's always telling us we can't do it, we're not enough, or why would we think we could do this, or how could you have done that, like brings us down the shame cycle or keeps us in our fear, right? Whereas the positive self-talk is like our cheerleader, and that we want to like amplify. So using these different mindset tools, we are trying to lessen the radio and the volume on the gremlin, and we're trying to pump up the volume and the radio dial on the cheerleader. The instructional self-talk is a wonderful way to start shifting if like saying something positive doesn't really resonate with you. It's a way to kind of start shifting things towards the positive until you start believing yourself, right? So for example, a thought stopping positive replacement technique would be to, as you're going through the day, and I do have students do this a lot of times, keep a notebook or a journal or on their phone every negative thought they're happening. As soon as you recognize that you're having a negative thought, which I usually call limiting beliefs, take a moment to stop, breathe, and then try to replace that sentence, that thought, with something more positive in the moment. Because what you're then doing is you're really trying to retrain what that like pathway in your brain goes every time that situation happens, right? I even then have them do a middle column that says where and when this was taking place. Because then after they do it for like a week, if they step back and I say, now you're like a scientist, you're a researcher, and you need to observe what's going on, what's the data you see? And they may say, wow, I always have negative thoughts first period. And I'll be like, well, what's happening first period? And maybe it's a subject that they really feel like they're not doing really well in, right? And I'll be like, okay, so what's asking questions. I don't really have any friends in that group, in that class, so I just feel really alone. I don't feel connected. You know, I was always told that I'm not very good at this, and like I just know I'm not, which that happens a lot, where someone at one point said something and we hold on to that limiting belief, and then that becomes our truth, right? Whereas maybe they never have negative thoughts last period, and that's like their favorite subject, and they really resonate with the teacher, and they have like a group of friends that are really into it, and they can ask each other questions, and they feel like when they don't know something, they feel good to ask out for help and everything like that. So it helps you to understand where are you thinking more negatively and where are you thinking more positively, and how can you use things from those situations to help each other. So I usually have them keep a log, and I do this for myself too. If you don't want to keep a log, just being able to notice when you're getting a negative thought before it goes down what I call the downward spiral is really empowering, because then you can stop and choose, what do I actually want to think in this moment? And then replace it or just let it go. So number 3, so this one is also a favorite of mine. It's called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, also known as tapping. And what I love about this one is it's under the body section, yet it really brings in affirmation, so mental training work, it brings in body work, and it brings in energy work. So we're going to tap on different parts of our body which align with our different meridian points, which are what they use in acupuncture and Reiki. So it's the energy circuit in our body. So we'll do this. I'll lead you through a few of them. And because you're on all mute, you can actually say this out loud as well and not be heard. So you're going to start by taking your fingers and tapping on your karate chop of any hand. It doesn't matter which one. And whatever it is that you maybe are feeling overwhelmed by. So let's say, it's Monday and it's a whole new week. And, here we are going into week 4, I think, 3 or 4, who knows, right? So maybe I'm saying like, I am safe. I am thankful that I have a job that I can still do remotely. I am thankful that I am healthy in mind, body, and spirit. I now want to release anxiety that I feel for the week to come. Then I'm going to go to the top of my head and I might say something similar to that. Like, I am thankful that I am healthy. I am ready to release anything that's getting in my way. Then you're going to go to the point where your eyebrows kind of come to your nose, the bridge of your nose, and you're going to say things too, like releasing anything that's getting in my way, releasing anxiety. Then I'm going to go tap on the side of my eye and be like, I am thankful for being healthy. I am thankful to be able to see my students. And then I'm going to go under my eye. I release anything that's standing in my way. Then I'm going to go under my nose. I am thankful. I am grateful. Every week is a new week for miracles and blessings. Under the chin, I release anything that's limiting me, all my negative thoughts and beliefs. Down by your collarbone, I am thankful. I am ready to be open to this new week. Then you're going to go right underneath your armpit, like 4 inches down. I release all that's in my energy field, in my past, in my future. And then you're going to finish again on the karate chop. I am thankful. I am healthy. I am whole. And then you would sit and you would stop and take a big breath. Notice how your feet feel. Notice how your hands feel. And then you can do that over and over again. And like anywhere from like 3 to 5 minutes, you can do it multiple times a day, but it literally physically changes the energy in your body, the physiological nature of your body. It also helps you to shift your mindset somewhere else. And it's physically giving you something to do, which some people need that when they feel overwhelmed or stressed. You can control where you're tapping, right? A lot of times with stress, it's because you don't feel like you can control something. I'm going to go through 2 more. We probably won't get through the whole thing because we're running out of time. But like I said, you're going to get all of these and my email will be there because I do want to leave time for questions. So number 4 is a perspective, right? So I said at the beginning, stress management is all about perspective and lens shifting and having tools to be able to do that. So one of my favorite things is to, if I'm feeling really overwhelmed by something or I'm feeling stressed out about like something I need to do or a presentation I need to give or any of that, or a writing sample I need to give out, anything of that nature, I'll stop and be like, okay, what would my favorite superhero do right now? What would he or she say? How would they go about this? And one of the reasons I chose this image is one of the other questions in the work. What would my younger self tell me right now? How could I be more like my younger self or my inner child? Right? So this one kind of brings it both together with how can I be my inner child and a superhero, like double whammy, right? So you're literally taking yourself out of the situation and it's like, how does that person look at this situation? How would they think of that word that keeps tripping me up? Or how would they talk to that person that I'm afraid to have a conversation with? How would they advocate for themselves, right? All of that sort of stuff. And then from there being like, what of those can I take upon myself? How can I step into their shoes? And a lot of this work is all about being able to observe yourself without judging yourself, right? When you're having a negative thought, guess what? We all have them. We are human, and it is okay, right? And so not judging that you're having that negative thought, or especially right now with everything that's going on in the world, like there may be a day where you're like, I just don't want to do anything. That is okay, right? Like not judging ourselves for feeling that way, though how can we be gentle with ourselves? How can we give what we need in order to then show up the next day? Right? So I'm going to skip these, the body scan, I'll tell you a little bit what the body scan is. I would have led you through one, but it would have been a whole nother 10 minutes. But a body scan basically is visualizing. Right here, this one is like the colors of the chakras, but you don't need to do that. You could literally visualize a white light and using your breath, just hitting every single part of your body and just imagining that white light, just like like rushing all of the like guck and stuckness and frustration out of your body, right? So it's literally just flushing it all out. And then I like to take a few moments feeling like flushed out, and then take a colored light of my choosing and think about that coming in through my toes and filling me up with everything I need, right? All the stuff I need. So you're using that visualization again, but you're also, it's a form of meditation. A lot of times the body scan is what you do to then get into a different meditation practice. Like I said, you could also visualize the different colors of the chakras. And if you have questions about that, feel free to reach out. So mandala practice, like coloring books, are a really wonderful way to get yourself back into your creativity, right? Like you don't actually you could draw your own mandala. That's also a practice. So you can get these, you could print these offline and then just get colors, and you get to choose. Colors are happy and fun, and it's a meditative process while also activating your creativity, which is something that is so helpful in stress management, because when we're creative, we're being curious, we're expressing ourselves, and we're getting the energy and the emotions, which is just energy in motion, right? So emotions, energy in motion, and we're getting them out, which is what we need in order to not keep it stuck in our body, which then translates to muscle tension and fatigue and illness, which then can cause some diseases. And the last one we have here is core values. And one of the things I have people do is just write down, you can go online and you could like look up like list of values, and you'll see like hundreds of words. So print that out or keep it on your phone, on your screen, and write down